If you listen to records or you listen to the radio, that is a very familiar sound. That happens to be the #1 country record in the whole United States of America. This guy has had 9 straight #1 songs, and it's always a pleasure to have him back. Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. Go,
go! This is the San Joaquin Sound Podcast, the podcast about music in Bakersfield and the surrounding San Joaquin Valley. I'm your host, AJ Rodriguez. This is part 2 in a series of 3 episodes. They were all recorded over the past couple months over the phone with Willie Cantu, the drummer in Buck Owens and the Buckaroos' classic lineup in the 1960s. Part 1 covers his time growing up in Corpus Christi, Texas, and eventually joining the Buckaroos, and some of his first experiences as he moved to Bakersfield. Part 2 covers his time with Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, touring the world and recording hit after hit. Part 3 covers his exit from the band and his subsequent journey in studying a bunch of other types of music, like Ghanaian drumming and Scottish pipe band drumming, and even opening for Alice Cooper. So, in 1965, so I read in Buck Owens' autobiography that he was 302 days on the road that year, that it was the busiest year for the Buckaroos. You remember how crazy that was?
64 was the year. That
it would have been 64? Okay.
Because he told me on the phone when he called to ask me to join the band, he said that we would be out of town at least, something over 300 days a year. So he said, don't even bother getting an apartment, you'll be wasting your money. Just come stay out at the ranch,
Yeah.
It's how it was. So, no, we were out on the road, like he said, a lot. And pretty well all the jobs, say like 99% of the jobs were clubs. He was still doing a lot of clubs in. Then after he had success with Together Again and My Heart Skips a Beat, things changed for him. And probably 65 might have been a year that we started doing like auditorium shows, and like bigger venues than the small club. But we still did a lot of clubs. And so maybe by the second year, he started flying to jobs, meeting us at the venue, and we would just drive there and catch up with him, at the show. And then the third year, by then he was already pretty well established and really hit the big time. And so the whole band started flying as well as him. The more popular he got, the less enjoyment musically it became, because he had more hits, and so he wouldn't do the complete songs.
A lot of medleys?
A lot of medleys, exactly. It became like a 45 to maybe an hour show, and I was used to playing 4 or 5 hours, and that's what I enjoyed playing, and I just wasn't. By the time I left, I was unhappy because I wasn't doing as much playing as I would want to.
We should talk about some more about what it was like really living on the road for you. Because I know you went from being in a camper to a motorhome to a bus, and just...
Well, actually, no, we started with a motorhome.
Oh, you started with the motorhome. Okay.
Yeah, we started on it was a Dodge motorhome that he had. Within a couple of months or so, we were up north, and it was already winter where we were in Western Canada, blizzard type weather. And somehow Don was driving. Somehow he made a mistake, and we ended up off the road a bit. And so it did something to the suspension system of the motorhome. Someone in the area that knew us transported us to an airport or something, and we left the motorhome behind and we went on to a gig or something, or maybe we went back to Bakersfield. I can't really remember. But that was pretty well the end of the motorhome. And so Buck had the two pickup trucks with campers on them. And so the band rode in the camper, and Buck started flying. And I think we did that for maybe a couple of years until finally got a bus. That's the sequence that I remember. But, it was no big deal riding in the camper. It was usually one of us had to be sleeping in the back while the rest of us were up front. We made it work. We had no choice.
Yeah. And you were driving it, right?
Yeah, I drove too. I had my turn. They realized that I was a safe driver. I never drove the Dodge motorhome. I drove the bus because the bus was really easy to drive because, first of all, it was a custom-made bus for the band,
Cool.
which meant it had like 4 bunks. It was an airporter. It was a smaller bus than like Trailways or Greyhound. It was used by airports mainly for transporting people. The engine was in the rear. Flexible was the name of the company that made this. And I remember Tom and Don flying out there. Once we had decided how we wanted the inside to be, they flew out to kind of make sure that things ran as we want them,
Yeah.
'Cause it was being custom built for us to our specifications. They drove it back. When the bus was just about ready, that's when they flew out there,
That's
to bring
cool.
it back to drive it back to Bakersfield. And the thing different about it mainly was it had a Ford automatic transmission, which that made it possible for all of us to drive it because all we had to do is just put it on drive and take off, as opposed to having to gear down and shifting and all this like a regular bus would have been at that time.
Yeah.
Even I drove it quite often, and it was a fairly light bus that even if at one time we ran out of gas. Dole Holly was driving, and this is in L.A., which is just south of Bakersfield, 125 miles.
Yep.
We were doing a show maybe that night or the following night, I forget, and we were all down there, and he ran out of gas like about 2 blocks from a gas station. And so we all just got out, and 2 of us got out, and we were able to push the bus. It was that light, easy to move because it was completely flat. So I remember getting out and we pushed it, we weren't huffing or puffing. We just put a little muscle behind it, and it got rolling. But that's the only incident something like that happened. So, but I can't. I think one time, and I'm just remembering things here as we speak.
Yeah.
We were crossing Arizona, Arizona into New Mexico. I forget which state is which. Right next to Texas. It was late at night, and Tom was driving, and all of a sudden we heard a big thump, and then we felt the bus braking come to a halt. And what happened was Tom hit a horse,
Oh no.
what they called an Indian pony, and we were probably close to a reservation or something like that. And I guess this horse was just wild and somehow close to a highway and crossing the highway, running across the highway. And that was the end of the poor horse. And I think it might have done some minor damage to the side of the bus. We had a very strong bumper, I think, that kept us from having any real major damage to the front of the bus. But okay, so let's see. Don drove the motorhome off the road in the snow. Doyle ran out of gas. Oh, there was another incident with Don. We were signed into a motel, and he was taking us around to the back for us to unload. And as he turned, he made a turn too close to the edge of the motel. You know, like on the second floor, you have, like I don't know how many floors there was, maybe just two, but the upper tier that you walk on the second floor, right there corner, it's a sharp corner, and so he drove the bus, one part of the bus, into.
Oh no.
And so that was another strike for him. So that and then Tom, okay, he hit that Indian pony, and so nothing happened to me. Fortunately, I never had any accidents.
Wow.
These are just things that happen while you're out there,
Yeah.
and you never know what's going to happen. But running out of gas is kind of inexcusable. So Doyle never heard the end of that. So
Man.
that's about as much as I can tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, on the road, it's not like funny stuff was happening all the time or nothing like that. It was just life on the road.
Yeah. What about all your friendship with the Buckaroos? I'm sure you got a lot closer as you toured together so much.
The more we toured together, the more we hated each other.
Oh no.
No, no, no. I'm just joking about that. But, you get on each other's nerves.
Yeah.
That I got on their nerves, I'm sure, as well as they got on my nerves for different things. We were all very different from each other.
Yeah.
So therefore, stuff like that is bound to happen.
I heard
But
sometimes they like to play pranks.
well, yeah, it's part of being out there on the road.
Yeah.
And of course, they did that on me, especially in the beginning. I was very young and didn't know what to believe, and so it happened for a while. So we can move on to other things.
Yeah. We had Bakersfield, sometimes people call it Nashville West, making all these records, all these hits. And doing that outside of Nashville was pretty much for the first time. And so I was wondering, did you ever hear Buck Owens talk about what he felt about Nashville? As far as not the place, the industry wise.
Not really. I Nothing really comes to mind. It's just well, the voices, the overproduction, a lot of songs that made Nashville sound more pop oriented. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
Kind of,
Yeah.
they, everybody had to have voices behind their song. Jim Reeves, Ray Price, George Jones, you name them. Some of the most straight ahead country singers had voices, and so it made the music syrupy, so to speak. I don't know if Buck ever used that expression, but I've heard it, and that's what it reminds me of. It's sweetened, it's softened. It took the edge out of the music, whereas Buck Owens' music always had that edge.
Yeah.
There was no BS. This is what I got. This is what you get kind of attitude. And that's what made him stand out in my mind, and not belittling anything that ever came out of Nashville, but it was just a totally different sound, and it was very acceptable. But it wasn't what the Bakersfield Sound was, what it offered. And I don't think the Nash, except for uh, I might be cutting my own throat by saying this, but it doesn't matter now. I think Buck Owens and Merle Haggard are the only really two voices that came out of that whole thing that really will stand up to anyone else. And that's just my opinion.
I had a question about a song, I Don't Care. That's the first song that wasn't a shuffle?
That's right.
And
According to
how did
me,
that happen?
I don't know. I didn't write it. All I know is I played it at the session. It was probably one of the very first recording sessions that I did. I don't know if it was recorded at the same session as Crying Time. I think Crying Time was the first #1 song that I played on. And I'm not sure if that was recorded first before. I don't care. But if I'll have to listen to I don't care. But I'm pretty sure that on the intro of it, the way Don phrases it, the intro is just like it was a shuffle. Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it came about that I started playing eighth notes. I do not recall anybody saying this song will be different than the other songs. Don't play a shuffle. I don't recall Buck saying anything, or Don, or anybody else, the bass player. I think the way Buck operated, he or someone would come. I'm thinking he might sing us a little bit about the song, and then let us decide what we were going to play. And I'm thinking that's the way it happened. It was just one of those things that rhythmically it felt like something different than what Don was doing. Once I heard the song, that's because I know we all heard the song before we actually attempted to play it. Okay, that's the only logical thing that I can think of. And somehow I decided to play what I played, just like in Buckaroo. Nobody told me to play a Latin beat or come up with something. We listened to Bob Morris, the bass player on the session, that was our regular bass player on all the sessions. He wrote it. He played it on guitar for us. I decided what it should feel like, what I was hearing, and that's what I played. Nobody told me to play a sort of quasi-Latin beat, which is what it is, because it's not a true Latin rhythm the way I played it. But it sounds Latin because I took the basic elements of Latin rhythms and applied it to that song, and it worked. That's all. In the end, that's all that matters. So the same thing, I think, happened with and would happen with other songs. It all depends on what the song suggested to me when I first heard it. And Buck was relying on us to come up with something that, if it was different and it felt and it sounded good, that's what he would go with. And he was looking for that, especially in me and in Don, so that was kind of like the untalked about thinking in the group. Buck, like I told you in the beginning, I asked him the very first night, is there anything I need to know? Because we hadn't rehearsed, meaning we hadn't rehearsed before that first job. And of course I was nervous because I had no clue. I'd never played with that band before. He said, 2 things that I want you to remember, he said to me. We play on top of the beat, which I did not understand at first what he meant. And then the second thing, he says, if I don't like what you're doing, I will always tell you, which never happened. He never said anything to, hey, Willie, can you change this or don't do that? Or never. I think he learned to trust the way I played, that I would do what was the right thing, that I would find what I thought was the right thing. And fortunately, it turned out to be the right thing for him.
Yeah.
But I never thought about it. Well, am I doing the right thing or this, or do I need to change? It never entered my mind. I just played. That's the kind of freedom we all had.
I think of this video I saw on YouTube of you playing Sam's Place on the Mike Douglas show. And you're really going for all the fills. Like it sounds a lot more energetic than like the original recording because of your drum playing.
Yeah, and the record, they wanted everything to be clean, and I never used cymbals other than the hi-hat. I never used a crash. Maybe on an instrumental I might have used a crash, and maybe a rhyme cymbal, but I never used on any of the early Buck stuff. And the bass drum was never mic'd. It wasn't until we did Tiger by the Tail they actually recorded the bass drum.
Wow.
Because you can hear it. So by the time of Sam's Place, things started changing, and I would play as cleanly as possible on the record, not to detract from the vocal, and then live, I was free to do whatever I wanted with it. That's how it started, and that's why on the Mike Douglas show, I played the way I did, because that's how I played when we were playing for an audience.
Nice. You know, you're known for your fast shuffle hi-hat patterns, and your hi-hat patterns are faster and more complex than the previous Buck Owens drummers. And I was wondering, my friend wanted me to ask, my friend Kyle, he wanted to know what type of hi-hat cymbals you were using in those earlier days, like from the Tiger from the Tail era.
Uh-huh. Nothing. First of all, there were no hi-hat. I didn't play hi-hat cymbals on Tiger by the Tail or that whole album. It was the top of a stool from the studio. On that session, I think after the first take, something wasn't clicking for the sound they wanted to hear from the drums. And so I remember distinctly, possibly the A&R man who was in charge of the recording said something about, what have you got that can give us a cleaner sound? And so they just kind of left it with me. And I went around tapping and asking them, how did this sound? How does that sound? And I finally went over to a stool, that one of those tall stools that Frank Sinatra and Buck used to sit on while they're singing, And I'm pretty sure it was a metal top as opposed to a wooden top. It had too much ring on it, so I kind of dampened it with a towel or something. I forget what all I did. And I said, well, how about this? And they said, that's it. That's the sound we want to hear.
Wow.
And so I did Tiger by the Tail with that, and that was the sound they liked, and they said leave it like that for the whole album. And so I'm pretty sure I recorded the whole album with, if all the songs we might have done that album all in one day, and so you'll find out by the dates whether it is true or not. But I'm thinking all the recording that we did that particular day was all using that stool.
Wow.
And it's the cleanest hi-hat sound you'll ever hear from any of the other Buck Owens records.
And it's not even a hi-hat. Wow.
No, and my hi-hat cymbals were nothing special. They were just like regular. I only had one set of hi-hats. When I bought them, they were to match my Zildjian cymbals. They were considered jazz cymbals. Nothing special about them. But since then, I gradually started trying to get more definition out of the hi-hat sound. And I finally came up to using a heavier cymbal on the bottom, like a marching band weight. And that's what I use. That's what I use to this day, a real heavy bottom. And actually, one of my cymbals there was a time about 20 years or so ago where Zildjian started making these really heavy cymbals for, bands like Kiss and all the real heavy rock bands.
Yeah.
And so I found a pair of those. I forget what the designation is, but I'll text you what it is. But they're like for playing in a heavy metal band. Okay, they're really heavy cymbals. So I remembered years ago that one of the local drummers that had studied with my teacher at that time in Corpus played the strange sounding set of hi-hats. And I remember asking him, they were 15s and they were heavy band cymbals. He said, with these cymbals, you're not going to miss the sound of the hi-hat because it's very clear It was a very dry and very distinct, clear sound that I recall, and I always remembered that. And so I think that's how I decided to experiment with a heavier bottom rather than the double heavy, because I still wanted to have a regular sounding top cymbal,
Yeah.
you know. So that's the combination that's worked for me all these years. Find the heaviest, low, especially low pitch is important for a bottom cymbal. And they all, Sabian and Zildjian, everybody makes them. They make heavy cymbals. So find you something that's a contrast from the top cymbal and kind of experiment with cymbals on the over the heavy one till you get the sound that you want. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah. So now that we're talking drums, you had 3 drum sets that I know of when you're playing with the Buckaroos: the Slingerland set, the Gretsch, and the Rogers, right? What was your
Yeah.
favorite?
Well, each of them was. That's why I had them at the time. So my first drum set was the Slingerland. Okay.
You got
And I
that?
can't,
Is that one you got in Corpus Christi?
yeah, yeah. And I still owed money on it. And I think that first year with Buck, I finished paying for it.
Yeah.
Um, and I used to send money home, to finish paying for those drums. And then after I finished paying for them, I traded them in on a set of Gretsch. And the Gretsch did not turn out to be what I had hoped. I had problems tuning them, and that was the biggest downfall. It was just the way Gretsch drums were made at that time. Like the late 50s, early 60s, the shells were still a little bit oversized, and you could fit calfskin heads on them, but plastic heads, especially like Weather King heads, which was the main drum head at that time that was popular, they wouldn't always fit. And so I had to kind of just really squeeze them on there. And so they didn't tune up easily because there was too much pressure from the shell. And 67, when I got the Rogers, it was like day and night compared to the Gretsch. They were easier to tune because the shells were undersized. It allowed the heads to vibrate freely because there was no pressure from the shell onto the hoop of the drum head. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I never did endorse Rogers, but I got a set of Rogers because CBS had taken over Fender and Rogers drums at that time. And so that's how I ended up with a set of Rogers because the band played Fender. And so it made sense for me to play Rogers because it was part of the same conglomerate. And I was happier, especially with the snare drum, the Dynasonic. It's basically my favorite snare drum, even to this day.
Nice. And now that we're talking about the sounds of all the drums, let's talk about the Bakersfield Sound. I love to ask people, what is the Bakersfield Sound to you?
The Telecasters. That's number one. The bright Telecaster sound, the bright bass sound, the bright steel guitar, and the voice of Buck Owens. Without the voice of Buck Owens, it never happened. He's the one that fabricated that sound according to his idea of what he wanted to hear. Okay. And I'm sure there's interviews with him where he talks about it. So you might want to look into that. To me, in my mind, that's how you identify the Bakersfield sound, is hearing Buck's voice and the twangy guitars and the crystal clear bass. Nobody else was using that type of a bass sound at that point.
Yeah.
It were all really boomy, So that's what it is. And it's not if it has to be a drum sound, it's the hi-hat and the cross stick. Not any particular brand of anything. It's just the way. If you listen to the drummers before me, listen to the records a year or 2 years before me, and you'll hear Buck's drummers at that particular time play that way. And we each had our own sound, so to speak,
Yeah.
So that's about as much as I can tell you. There's no magic secret formula.
Oh yeah. No worries.
Drum
It's
sound, a lot had to do with the individual,
yeah. I had a question. Do you remember when you were in the band, Buck Owens made a pledge to
Oh
only
yeah.
sing country songs? And it just seems funny. What do you think about it?
Well, people used to make fun of it because what they used to say is, we shall record no song that isn't country except Memphis.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't a shuffle, and it was more rock oriented than What can I
Yeah.
tell you?
Yeah. They started to want to do instrumental albums of just the Buckaroos. How did that start?
Well, what happened was, uh, at Buck's recording sessions, a lot of times he would record extra songs, maybe featuring Don on fiddle, or maybe a steel guitar instrumental, something like that. So there was an accumulation of instrumental, none vocals by Buck, in other words,
Yeah.
or maybe a vocal by Don or Doyle or somebody that was in the band previously, and they used cuts like that as fillers for upcoming albums. If they didn't have enough songs, well, they'd take something from the past that hadn't been on an album and put it on a more current album, stuff like that. As time passed, say a couple of years after I was in the band, that sort of ended. I don't know how it happened, but I just remember that Bob Morris, the bass player, that was all on all our recording sessions. He was like the fifth Buckaroo, but only just on the records,
Yeah.
because he is the one that played bass and he never played in the band on the road. Okay, and so like Doyle Holly would maybe play acoustic rhythm, rhythm guitar, and so that's just the way it was. I don't know why, but when I got there, that's how things were. So he came in with this tune that he wanted Buck to listen to. The guys kind of learned it real quick. I don't know if anybody told me to come up with a different beat for it. I don't recall anything like that. But anyway, once we were running it down, I just came up with the idea of doing this kind of a quasi Latin beat. Quasi means almost, but not quite. And it wasn't a traditional rhythm that I was playing. I was playing a combination of rhythms, maybe a cowbell pattern that you hear in Latin music, combined, or maybe half of the clave pattern, and also partly what maybe a conga drummer would do with a slap and then open tones. The slap being imitated by the cross stick, and the open tones would be on the tom tom or the snare drum with no snares on. It was a combination of those sounds, and I just went with what I heard, and it was acceptable to him. And the next step was coming up with a name for the tune that Bob had written. So we were all told to try and come up with a name. So my idea was, because it had a Latin kind of twist to it, the rhythm, it fit the melody so well. I came up with El Buckaroo, since we were the Buckaroos playing this tune, and that name was kind of fitting for that tune. And so that was my idea, El Buckaroo. Well, they didn't like the idea of the L in it. I don't know why. Maybe it was because it was country music. But anyway, so they I don't remember what anyone else had said, but they decided to drop El Buckaroo and just go with Buckaroo. I'm not laying claim to the title, but as partially from the title that I came up with, Buckaroo was in in that title. So I don't know if anyone else has ever done an interview and said, well, I came up with a name, or Bob. I don't think Bob didn't have a name for it.
Yeah, I think they
So-
said the title was Paris before they changed it.
Okay. I don't know. I don't recall that. So that must have been what Bob Morris called it then. Paris.
Yeah. Yeah, but Paris didn't fit, they said, so then, yeah.
So what else did they say about it?
That's about it. In one of the biographies, it said that
Okay.
Bob brought in a song called Paris, and then they renamed
Okay.
it, but they didn't say specific. But now we know who. Yeah, that's cool. I really do like that album cover where you're all dressed as westerns.
Okay. Well, let me tell you about that. So this is what happened on those little 45 covers, or some of the pictures that were taken for that first Buckaroo album. That was kind of like the beginning of having, all those instrumentals. There had been some instrumentals that had been previously recorded that I think appear on that first Buckaroo album. That was the very beginning of the Buckaroo records, because I think I did the first two, and then after I left, well, they kept on making them. I don't know how many they did, but I know at least there was one or maybe two more. At some point, the Buck Owens organization sent me the whole collection of Buck's recorded output.
Oh, that's
from before I was in the band to the years that I was in the band, and then after. Even though I didn't ask for any of it, they just sent it to me. So I'm just going by memory here in terms of what I'm remembering. And so that was the beginning. Since Buckaroo had become such a major hit, I guess that was the stimulus to follow in that direction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Featuring the musicians in the band. And so the photos and all that, I mean, we went, I can tell you about that. One of the recording sessions happened, and I remember that I was still wearing the shirt that I wore for the photo shoot, which I think happened after the recording session. Because I remember there's several photographs of, I've got probably a couple of them from the photo shoot. And there's one of me and Don. Well, actually, he took the picture. We rode from Bakersfield to Los Angeles to Hollywood in his Austin Healey 3000, which is a roadster sports car, a two-seater.
Nice.
Okay, we all had our own little sports car rides that we kind of treasured. At least Don and I did at that time. Buck finally bought himself a Corvette and outdid the rest of us. But anyway, fun cars to have. But so anyway, we stopped somewhere in uniform, not uniform, but the outfits that we had taken our pictures in, and me with the Mexican outfit. And we stopped at a little convenience store because I think I was always hungry. I was hypoglycemic and didn't even know it. And so I used to get hungry quite a lot. And so we stopped and I bought a bag of potato chips, and it happened to be Lay's. So I'm standing right next to his car, to his sports car, leaning on a lamppost or something, eating potato chips, and he took a picture of me doing that. And the reason why we did that with the Lay's potato chips is because there had been a commercial on TV at that time that was very popular, and it had to do something with Lay's potato chips and the old West days, with the Mexican bandits and the cowboys. And so that was the theme. And so what the commercial was, there's these bandits hiding behind a rock out in the desert, and and they're Mexican, okay? And there's this cowboy riding along the trail, and they jump him, with their guns and stuff, and he's on the horse eating potato chips, and they were Lay's.
That's funny.
And so the Mexican, one of them says, he said, let me see, how did it go? Okay, so they held him up, and he said you might, he said to the bandits, you might not believe this, but my name is Granny Goose. And one of the Mexicans says, well, Goose, what you got in the bag? So he proceeds to tell him potato chips, and I think he gave him the bag of potato chips or a bag. I don't remember any more of that, but
Yeah.
that was part of the reason why I did that photo shoot like that.
Yeah, that's
just for us. And I have a copy of that. I'll send you that, and I'll send you one or two other photos that I have of the actual photo shoot which was done out in the Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, Hollywood Hills. I think
Hollywood Hills, yeah.
Hollywood. Yeah, that's what it was.
Awesome.
So that's one story, and I remember going into earlier in the day before the recording session or anything. We had to be there early and meet and go to a movie storage place where they had all these different costumes for movies for actors to wear, and we had to find outfits for each other. And what led to that was Don's the one that had the idea for that album cover. And his idea was to dress up like outlaws. So I decided that since I'm of Mexican heritage, that I would dress up like a Mexican bandit. And so that's why my outfit is totally different from theirs. And
That's cool.
I had the big sombrero. And so that's how that came to be. And so anyway, I guess Don passed it on to Capitol Records, and so they made arrangements for us to get outfits from the movie places, the ones that furnished the actors. I was just like about 20 years old, 19 or 20, and I couldn't grow a mustache then, so they had phony mustaches. The mustache that I got to paste onto my upper lip was so long that I looked like Fu Manchu. So what I had to do is I had to cut half of it so that I would look more like a Mexican bandit. What you see on the cover is what we all chose, what we wanted to be.
That's cool. Okay, I got another question about something else. So Johnny Cash did a famous concert at San Quentin and made a live album. But 3 years before that, you played in January 1st, 1966, you played at San Quentin Prison. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
What was that
Yes,
like?
yes, I do. Well, I can tell you, I'd never been in a prison before, and so it was strange. The inmates were all going crazy, and not crazy because of us, because we had to follow Eartha Kitt.
Oh, wow.
You know who Eartha Kitt was?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do.
I doubt that she's still alive. I could be wrong, but she was like, I guess, a heavy sex symbol
Uh-huh.
at that time. And the way she sang, but I think I've only seen her once in a movie, and that's how I found out about her. Being an actress and a singer.
Yeah, I know
Those
her
were-
from that Santa Baby song. They play that every Christmas.
I don't know about that, but this is the movie that I saw years after we had been there. So that's what the whole row was about, was her walking on or off stage, because, she did what is considered a sexy walk,
Yeah.
moving her hips.
And
She
those
was
guys
o-
were locked up in prison for a while.
Yeah, and
They
she
were-
was overly endowed with body parts, and I'm sure that just drove the guys crazy.
And you had to follow Eartha Kitt in a prison. I never knew she played it at, at San Quentin. Wow.
That's well, I'm pretty sure she was there because that's what I'm remembering.
Yeah, no, I believe you. I'm just saying, like, what a different time, having
Yeah.
concerts. They don't have those anymore. Well, maybe I don't think they
And
do.
And when we played, they all went crazy too, because I think Buck was a big smash to begin with, you know. But Eartha Kitt was just like something else.
Were you
You know?
separate from the prisoners? Or like were you in a
We were,
different room?
of course, we were like on a stage. That's what I'm remembering.
Wow.
So there was no way they could get to us if they wanted to.
Yeah.
That's all I can tell you.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's cool. What about when you were recording the Buck Owens Ranch show? Was that a fun experience?
I don't think so,
No.
because of the hot lights and
Oh, yeah.
the long waiting periods between takes. At that time, to me, being in any kind of a studio with television, they always had these really bright lights, which I really had a problem with. It was hard for me to smile when those lights were on, and so I don't think it was fun. I never saw it as fun, and I just couldn't wait for it to end.
Yeah,
And
that makes
usually,
sense.
we did more than one show in one day. You know, I think we used to go to. It was in Oklahoma City where they were done, and the Mathis Brothers Furniture Company were the sponsors for it. That's how it started, the Mathis Brothers production.
Yeah.
And then I think it might have changed title because it became part of, I don't know how Buck ended up with ownership of all of that. From the date of one of the very first shows that I have, they were done in 1966. And the very first week that we were in Oklahoma City, when we were done at the end of that week, we had one more week before we did Carnegie Hall. If you ever wanted to see what we sounded and looked like, all you have to do is see that first TV show. That was like a week before we actually did Carnegie Hall.
Wow. We should talk
So,
about Carnegie Hall too.
well, shoot.
All right. I just want to point out it must have been what you started playing drums and it was 4 years and then you played Carnegie Hall. That's how quick, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Hey, so you're like a prodigy, at
I
drums.
guess I never thought myself as that, but maybe I was, because I was very young and very accomplished within that short time.
Yeah. So you'd played so many concerts before. Did it feel a lot different playing Carnegie Hall to you?
Of course, first of all, I knew that one of my heroes had played Carnegie Hall back in the late 30s. This is Gene Krupa, the drummer. He's pretty well the first drummer to really become really popular and popularize the drum solo. Okay, with the big bands that were happening at that time. And he was with the Benny Goodman Orchestra in the late 30s. And I think 1938 or something like that. Their popularity really broke through when they appeared at Carnegie Hall, and they had people dancing in the aisles, and everything just kind of just broke loose.
Yeah.
So, and it was also the first time that they'd featured a drum solo, which is Gene Krupa, and that had a lot to do with it too. The crowd just went wild, and so knowing this from history, and I hadn't heard the original recordings yet, but I knew about Carnegie Hall as being the place where all this had happened, and when I was actually there, I just remember while I was setting up my drums, thinking that I was probably setting up my drums very close to where Gene Krupa had set up his. And so that just kind of just put me into another headspace. You might say I entered another realm in history, and just I was so related, I can't, just the fact that I was there. But once it was time for us to play, I just forgot about it and just did my thing with the band like we always did.
Yeah.
It's too bad that it wasn't videotaped. It should have been videotaped.
Yeah, that would have
But
been cool.
I think maybe there wasn't enough time to really put it all together, and someone or the management, Jack McFadden, to say, well, we should we're at Carnegie Hall. How many chances are we going to get to play here? We should have this videotaped. Somebody, or even Capitol Records, they should have thought ahead what it would have been like to have that documented, not only on a recording, but live, you know.
Yeah.
Buck and I talked about that years later, and he didn't understand why no one or even him come up with the idea of having it videotaped. That's about as much as I can tell you.
Yeah, it's known as one of the greatest live albums ever recorded. People really enjoy it, and it's just a great album, and it's cool to hear all the banter of the because you can listen to the songs, on the records, but hearing the live album and hearing all the live and the banter and the jokes of what
Yeah.
your stage show was like is really cool. I heard that the gunshot scared everyone there for a minute.
Yeah, it was a muzzleloader, an antique gun that Don had that was really loud, you know, and it kind of became part of the act.
Yeah, part of the Beatles routine, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what about in New York? Did you get to go to any jazz places while you were there?
Of course I did. I was probably, anywhere I went, I just went by myself because none of the guys had any interest in going to a jazz club. Don, I think of all the guys, was the only one that had a slight interest in jazz, but mainly guitar jazz, you know. But
Yeah.
the people that I listened to, he wouldn't have enjoyed because he was used to a different style of that music, you know. So it didn't matter. It didn't stop me. I just was warned to watch my back for fear that I might get mugged. So when I took off on my own, I never forgot that. I got on the subway and got down to Greenwich Village, where the Village Vanguard was, and proceeded to have a good time.
That's awesome. Who do you remember seeing
Well,
play?
I went mainly to see Miles Davis's band.
Ooh, wow.
He had a drummer that was a year older than me. He was 18, I was 17. His name was Anthony Williams, Tony Williams. He was new on the scene and making a big splash in jazz because he brought a new sound, a new concept of playing, and he just kind of became, within a year or two, a very major drum artist, somebody that took the music, jazz drumming, to a new level. But I was very fortunate that I was there at that particular time because I walked into the club and it was empty. So I went and sat myself over right next to the bandstand, which is all the same level as the audience, and at the almost the last table at the end of the wall there, very close to where Tony Williams was set up. You know, I was just a few feet away from him, so I could see and hear everything he was doing very clear, very distinctly, and see the rest of the band. What happened that night was that Miles Davis didn't show up. I have no idea why. And after a while, it didn't matter because the band was great without Miles. And fortunate for me, I was the only. Unfortunate for them, I was the only customer that had the first set. And so during the break, that first break, I went over to Tony and introduced myself, and he was very friendly, and we got to talking. Once he found out I was a drummer, he invited me to follow him over to a back room where we could just hang out and just not be in the actual club itself.
Yeah.
So we spent the whole break, talking about jazz and drumming and my ideas about certain things and certain people, and we liked some of the same players and stuff. So we had a good time talking. So it was time for the break to be over, and they were going to do another set. So they did another set. I stayed there and listened again to another set, and then a few people came in, and so I didn't get to hang out with them the second set because he came over and told me that there were some people there he needed to go and say hello to and talk to. So I understood, so no problem. So anyway, so I stayed for another set. When he came back, they did another set, and then at the end, I was getting ready to leave, and I was thanking him for being such a friendly person and easy to talk to, and this and that. And so he said, "Well, what are you doing now?" I says, "Well, I guess just go back to my motel room." And he said, "Well, listen, Herbie Hancock, the pianist, and I are going to go over to the 5 spot where Charles Mingus and his band are playing. They'll probably be playing till about 4 o'clock or 5 in the morning." And so he said, "You're welcome to come with us." So I said, "Sure." So anyway, on the way there, I sat in the cab that Tony flagged, and I ended up sitting in between Tony and Herbie Hancock. And Tony introduced me and telling him who I was and why I was in New York City. I don't know that they'd ever heard of Buck Owens, but Herbie did say that in his earlier days, he was from that part of from uh, Detroit or Chicago, somewhere in that area. He said that he had played a lot of country music growing up, and which surprised me. And he said he enjoyed it, and he said that what he enjoyed about it was the singers really sang with a lot of feeling. And that was all he said to me the whole time. And so, you know, we got to the 5 spot, and I started seeing faces. I think the band was on a break, and I started seeing faces that I recognized from some of my album covers. At that time, Herbie and Tony were very popular because they were the new generation of jazz musicians, very well respected by the older musicians. And some of these guys were standing outside. We walk in, and Tony said, "Let's sit here at the bar." And there was a trio playing. And I had never heard of these musicians before, but they sounded really great. And we're sitting at the bar. Of course, I wasn't drinking. I didn't, and neither was Tony. And plus, we were too young to be served. So, and he turns over to me and he says, "Would you like to sit in with this group?" And I said, "What, me?" I mean, right away, I knew it would be a disaster. So I bowed out of that. And he said, "Well, I'd like to play with them, so come on with me. Let's go over to the back, and I'll talk to the drummer about sitting in." So I followed him all the way behind the bandstand, and in between the songs, he said something to the drummer, who right away got off, and Tony got on. They started playing, and it was just great hearing him play again with different people. It was a great night. Once Mingus's group came on there, and I started seeing faces in the band that I knew of, I was like in hog heaven, you might say. Getting to hear some of these great musicians that I had heard only on record.
That's awesome.
And on the way at the end of early in the morning, at the end of the music there, and going back to the motel where I was, I rode with Herbie and Tony again, and another well-known drummer, Billy Higgins. They dropped me off at the Lowe's Midtown Motor Inn. That's where we were staying at. And every time we went to New York, that's where we stayed at. So anyway, I had gotten Tony's address and phone number and this and that. And he told me to call him next time I was in town, and we'd try to get together. And that was it. They were very nice to me. That was like a dream night. I never expected anything like that to ever happen to me on my first night in New York City.
Yeah. And if people listen to this, if you don't know jazz, basically a lot of the people that Willie was talking about are like jazz royalty, basically.
Yes. And Herbie Hancock is still alive now, and he's still producing great music, recording. Tony Williams, fortunately, died a few years ago of a heart attack, I think. Maybe it's been like 20 years since he's been gone. Miles Davis is no longer alive. And I didn't see Miles that trip, but I saw him years later in California. And Ron Carter, the bass player, is still alive and well and playing and still playing. And the saxophone player, George Coleman, I think he might still be alive, but he's quite an elderly person now. I think he still records. If he's still alive, he's still recording.
That's
Great
cool.
saxophone. So that was the group lineup at 1964.
Did you go to jazz clubs in all the cities that you were, or try to go to them in multiple cities that you toured?
Uh, the only jazz clubs that I remember ever going to were New York City because I knew of them. In Chicago, never did or have time to, and or Detroit, and the only other city was Los Angeles. In Hollywood, there was a jazz club called Shelley's Manhole, and Shelley Mann, who was the owner, was a drummer, a well-known drummer that was very popular in the 50s. He was from New York City originally and had come to fame in the late 40s with the Stan Kenton Orchestra. And Shelley, as well as a lot of musicians from the East Coast, New York City being, that had been with the Stan Kenton Orchestra, they all migrated to LA, and the majority of them ended up in the studios, as did Shelley Mann, not only making jazz records, but also records with a lot of other people, and also movies. They appeared in soundtracks of a lot of movies, during the 50s. So Shelley Mann's club, the Manhole was the name of it, is a club that I used to frequent because it was, I'm just guessing here, maybe a mile away from where Capitol Records was. It was in the same general area in Hollywood. And I got to see several of other favorite jazz musicians there.
That's awesome. So after the Carnegie Hall concert, you did do another live album in Japan, which is sounds a lot different than the Carnegie Hall. They both sound great though. And how was it going to Japan and bringing country music to Japan?
Well, it was a major event for me because it was unknown. And I'd heard some music before going to Japan, some instruments. They were either Japanese or Chinese of origin. And so I always had a curiosity for music from other parts of the world other than in this country. And like Africa, especially India, Japan, China. And so therefore it was exciting going there and being amongst the people, even though I couldn't understand what they were saying. Um, I don't know. It's just very intriguing to me, and it didn't matter to me that I didn't understand. Just being there in a totally different culture than what I was used to, it just opened up my mind more. The same thing happened when we went to Europe, to Paris or Germany. I had so much respect for what history was in those countries, and even in Japan. So it was just a great experience, I can say.
That's cool. And you talked about Gene Krupa's drum solo. You played a drum solo on that album, right?
Yes, I did, and I was going to mention that that same stage and concert hall, Kosaninkin Hall, was the same hall that several great jazz musicians had appeared with their bands there, and most notably, John Coltrane and his group recorded an album or double albums there.
Cool.
And so there again, I felt like I was in a very sacred type place because of the great musicians that had played there before me.
There's another song that I like on there called Tokyo Polka, and it's just you and Buck, right?
It basically featured us in the sense of I had little solo sections that I played along with him, but that was kind of like an impromptu decision on the airplane flying to Tokyo. Buck called me over and he said that he had these ideas. Once he wanted to do an instrumental tune, and Buck was kind of known for he liked to play polkas because he knew the audience enjoyed them, and so he wanted to do an exchange where I would have little sections where I could kind of do drum solo like things,
Yeah, like a
And,
call and response kind of.
Yeah, well, actually trading fours,
Trading
which is
chords,
more
cool.
which is more of a jazz thing. I don't recall very much about it. He asked me, well, he didn't ask me. He surprised me at the venue by saying, while we were on stage, he said, "Now Willie's going to do a drum solo." Well, I had no idea that I was going to do a drum solo until just then.
Wow.
So, and I had never played a drum solo before with the band or any other band that I remember. so, so I don't know how I came up with what I did, but I just remember in my mind, I didn't want it to be too long because I didn't want to hog the show. And so I can't believe I was so considerate because I could have played as long as I wanted to. And I'm sure that if it was too long, they would have cut it, What's the word? Splice it.
Yeah.
So anyway, it worked out. It was fine. Like I said, it was the very first time, and I think the very last time I actually played a solo with Buck. Because I wasn't necessarily into being featured as a soloist. I didn't see myself as a soloist. I was just an accompanist. I was happy just doing that.
Yeah.
I wasn't, and I'm still not a person that enjoys the spotlight being on me.
Is there any other concerts that really stick out in your mind that we didn't get to talk about yet?
Well, not concerts, but we did like the Jackie Gleason show. We did the Mike Douglas show. We did could have been the Dean Martin show. I'm not sure now. But the only one that really stands out is kind of like Jackie Gleason.
Oh yeah, how was that?
Well, no, I just remember I have a photo of us on the bandstand,
Oh yeah.
and so that's a reminder as much, but nothing really special happened other than just I had remembered seeing Jackie Gleason growing up on TV, so I couldn't believe that I was actually there on stage with him. So it's about as much as I can tell you. And I'm thinking I'm kind of talked out at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's great talking with you, as every time is so fun.
Well, it is fun because you make me think of, if you don't ask questions, I'm not going to remember stuff. Maybe things that I had never thought of or hadn't talked about in years, mainly because I don't live in the past. Simply put, that's it.
And I was going to say that you're, without a doubt, the warmest audience we ever had the opportunity to perform for, and we'd like to do it again sometime.